Picture this: a world where ancient civilizations peered into the future with startling precision, where prophecies carved into stone or whispered in forgotten tongues somehow mirrored events centuries later. These weren't just lucky guesses or vague warnings. They were eerily specific predictions about wars no one had fought yet, inventions no one had dreamed of, even the rise and fall of empires that wouldn't exist for thousands of years. How did they know? What secrets did they possess that allowed them to see beyond their own time? Today, we're uncovering 30 of the most jaw-dropping ancient predictions that came true, each one a puzzle piece in a mystery that stretches across millennia. From the cryptic visions of the Oracle of Delphi to the precise astronomical calculations of the Maya, these predictions defy easy explanation. Imagine a Babylonian clay tablet describing the exact path of a comet that wouldn't return for centuries, or a medieval alchemist's notes hinting at technologies like electricity and flight long before they became reality. These weren't wild stabs in the dark. They were detailed, almost clinical foresights that leave modern historians and scientists scratching their heads. What if these ancient seers weren't just mythmakers but something far more extraordinary? This journey isn't just about listing predictions, it's about stepping into the minds of those who seem to bend time itself. We'll explore how a Greek philosopher predicted the existence of atoms 2,000 years before science proved it, how a Chinese sage foresaw the fall of dynasties with unsettling accuracy, and even how an Egyptian papyrus might have hinted at the discovery of America. The deeper we dig, the more astonishing the connections become. So settle in, because by the end of this, you'll never look at history the same way again. The past might just hold the key to understanding things we've yet to discover about our future. One of the most famous examples of ancient foresight comes from the Oracle of Delphi, a sacred figure whose prophecies shaped the course of Greek history. In 480 BCE, as the mighty Persian Empire prepared to invade Greece, the desperate leaders of Athens sent a plea to the oracle. What they received was a cryptic warning: "The wooden wall alone shall not fall, but save you and your children." At first, this baffled the Athenians. Some believed it meant reinforcing their city's wooden barricades, while others saw it as divine instruction to abandon Athens entirely. But the statesman Themistocles offered a radical interpretation. What if the wooden wall wasn't a barrier of timber, but the fleet of Athenian warships? This was no ordinary guess. The oracle had a track record of delivering prophecies that seemed nonsensical at first, only to prove devastatingly accurate in hindsight. Hidden in poetic riddles, her words often required deep reflection to unlock their true meaning. And sure enough, when the Persian king Xerxes arrived with his overwhelming forces, the Athenians followed Themistocles' advice. They evacuated their city, trusting their navy to defend Greece. The result, the legendary Battle of Salamis, where Athens' wooden walls, their triremes outmaneuvered the Persian fleet in the narrow straits, turning the tide of the war. Without this interpretation, Greece might have fallen completely. What makes this prediction so chilling isn't just its accuracy, it's the oracle's uncanny knack for phrasing truths in ways that only made sense when the moment arrived. Her prophecies weren't straightforward forecasts, they were puzzles that demanded wisdom to decipher. Some historians argue the priests at Delphi had vast political intelligence, feeding insights into the oracle's pronouncements. Others believe there was something more mystical at play, an ancient connection to forces we still don't fully understand. Either way, this wasn't a lucky guess. It was a calculated, layered warning that saved a civilization, and it raises a haunting question: how many other prophecies, dismissed as nonsense in their time, were actually glimpses of a future waiting to unfold? The Athenians' gamble on Themistocles' interpretation of the oracle's words would change the course of history. When Xerxes' colossal Persian fleet, numbering over 1,000 ships, entered the narrow straits near Salamis, the Greeks were hopelessly outnumbered. But their triremes, those wooden walls, had a secret weapon: maneuverability. The Persian ships built for open sea battles were like lumbering giants in the tight waterways, while the lighter Athenian vessels darted between them like knives. Herodotus, the ancient historian who chronicled these events, described the chaos with vivid detail. The Greeks fought in good order, every ship bearing down on the enemy with disciplined fury, while the Persians, crowded together, could neither retreat nor advance without colliding. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. The Greeks used the terrain itself as an ally, funneling the Persian fleet into a deadly bottleneck where their numbers became a liability. As triremes rammed into one another, oars snapped and panic spread. The once mighty Persian armada began to crumble. By sunset, the straits were choked with wreckage, and Xerxes, watching from a golden throne onshore, reportedly wept as his invasion plans dissolved. The prophecy had come true in the most spectacular way imaginable. Those wooden walls didn't just save Athens, they shattered an empire's ambition. But here's the eerie part. The oracle's phrasing didn't just predict the outcome, it hinted at the method. The wooden wall alone shall not fall suggested something enduring, something that could withstand chaos. And that's exactly what the triremes did. Unlike stone walls that could be toppled or cities that could be sacked, the Athenian fleet remained mobile, adaptive, unstoppable, precisely because it wasn't anchored to one place. Even Herodotus seemed awed by the precision of the prophecy, noting how the gods whispered truths that men must struggle to comprehend. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a validation of an entire way of interpreting the unseen. The priests at Delphi might have had spies or political savvy, but the sheer specificity of the prediction, linking salvation to a concept rather than an object, goes beyond mere intelligence gathering. It's as if the oracle glimpsed a thread of fate and tugged it just enough for history to unravel exactly as foreseen. And that raises a spine-tingling possibility. What if some ancient predictions weren't just educated guesses, but fragments of a logic we've yet to decipher? Centuries before flames engulfed London in 1666, a French apothecary turned prophet penned words that would send shivers down generations. Nostradamus, the enigmatic figure whose quatrains have fueled debate for over 400 years, described a scene almost too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The blood of the just shall be demanded of London, burned by fire in 3 times 20 plus 6. At first glance, his cryptic verse seems like the usual foggy symbolism typical of medieval prophecies. But when you place it beside the grisly details of the Great Fire, which erupted in the year 1666 and raged for 3 days, the parallels become almost uncomfortable. The fire's origin in a bakery on Pudding Lane might sound like random misfortune, but Nostradamus' description takes on eerie resonance when you examine how the disaster unfolded. His mention of the blood of the just could point to the fire's timing beginning just after midnight on September 2nd, an hour when London's poorest citizens, often called the just for their hard labor, were asleep in their densely packed wooden homes. As flames leaped from house to house, fueled by a summer drought and strong winds, the city's labyrinthine streets became death traps. Eyewitness accounts from the time describe a hellish spectacle: embers raining down like falling stars, molten lead flowing from rooftop gutters, and a suffocating smoke that turned day into night. The fire didn't just burn London, it devoured it, exactly as Nostradamus' quatrain warned, leaving 87 churches and 13,000 homes in ashes. Yet the most chilling detail isn't the prophecy's broad strokes, it's the tiny, inexplicable accuracies. Take the phrase 3 times 20 plus 6. While many assume this simply encodes the year 1666, some historians note that the fire's most destructive phase lasted 66 hours, a span that fits the math with unsettling precision. Even the fires in Point at Pie Corner, marked for centuries by a grotesque golden statue of a child holding flames, feels like a macabre punchline to Nostradamus' riddle. Was this all just a string of lucky guesses, or did Nostradamus, like the Oracle of Delphi, possess a method for glimpsing threads of fate? Skeptics argue his quatrains are vague enough to fit countless disasters, and that hindsight bends interpretations to fit events. But defenders counter that Nostradamus' predictions often hinge on numbers and sequences, elements far harder to dismiss as coincidence. His writings reference specific dates, durations, and even geographic details that align with historical records in ways that feel deliberate. Whether you view him as a genuine seer or a master of calculated ambiguity, one thing's certain: his words have a habit of echoing where history roars loudest. And that raises a provocative thought. If Nostradamus did see London's fate, what else in his tangled verses might still be waiting for its moment to click into place? Nostradamus didn't just toss words onto parchment like leaves in the wind. He worked with a method that blurred the line between calculation and clairvoyance. Scholars who have spent lifetimes dissecting his quatrains point to his use of anagrams, astrological alignments, and even ancient wordplay to cloak his visions. Take his prediction about the rise of Napoleon. An emperor will be born near Italy / who will cost the empire dearly. At first glance, it seems vague until you learn Napoleon's full name. Napoleon de Bonaparte links him unmistakably to Italy, and his wars drained France's treasury dry. But here's the twist: Nostradamus never names Napoleon outright. Instead, he hides clues in plain sight, like a linguistic treasure map waiting for history to fill in the blanks. This pattern of layered meaning repeats in his prophecy about the French Revolution. One quatrain mentions the Great Revolution, where the chiefs of the people will be hung by their necks, a chilling match for the guillotine's reign of terror. Another describes mobs chanting "Peace, peace," while violence engulfs Paris, mirroring the revolution's paradox of ideals drenched in blood. Skeptics argue these are broad enough to fit any uprising, but Nostradamus' precision with dates is harder to dismiss. In his epistle to Henry Roman II, he mentions the year 1792, the exact year the French monarchy fell. Could that really be chance? Perhaps the most jaw-dropping example involves World War II. Nostradamus wrote of a great evil rising from the heart of Europe, with a leader whose emblem was an eagle, a near-perfect match for Hitler's Third Reich. Even more unsettling, his reference to Hister, a term long debated by scholars. Some claim it's a misspelling of Hitler, while others note Hister was an ancient name for the Danube River, a region central to Nazi expansion. Whether coincidence or coded genius, the alignment is uncanny. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Nostradamus didn't operate in a vacuum. He borrowed from older traditions of prophecy, mixing Christian apocalyptic texts with medieval astrology. His famous centuries weren't meant to be read linearly. He often rearranged verses to thwart easy interpretation. This deliberate obfuscation raises a tantalizing question. Did he want his predictions to be understood only after the fact? Some researchers believe his vagueness was a survival tactic in an era where foretelling the death of kings could get you burned at the stake. Others argue it was part of a grander design, a puzzle meant to reveal its secrets only when humanity was ready to see them. The debate over Nostradamus' legitimacy may never be settled, but one thing's undeniable: his words have a habit of finding their mark centuries later. Whether through cunning wordplay, divine insight, or sheer luck, his quatrains continue to haunt our imagination. And that leaves us with a lingering thought. If so many of his prophecies have already unfolded, how many more are still waiting in the shadows of time? The year 2012 sparked global panic as doomsday fever swept across the planet, all thanks to a single misunderstood date on the ancient Mayan long count calendar. News channels aired apocalyptic specials, survivalists stockpiled bunkers, and Hollywood cashed in with disaster films, all based on one colossal misinterpretation. The truth: the Mayan never predicted an end at all. Their calendar didn't count down to destruction. It marked the completion of a vast cosmic cycle, like a celestial odometer rolling over to begin anew. To grasp why this matters, you have to understand how the long count worked. Unlike modern calendars tracking years in isolation, the Maya saw time as nested layers of cycles, each with its own spiritual significance. The end date, everyone fixated on December 21, 2012, simply signaled the close of a 13-Bacton period, roughly 5,125 years. For the Maya, this wasn't doomsday, it was renewal day. Imagine it like the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, an ending that's really a fresh start. Their inscriptions carved at Palenque and Tortuguero even celebrate this transition, describing it as the arrival of a sacred patron deity, not the collapse of civilization. So where did the apocalypse myth come from? Blame a game of historical telephone. Early 20th century scholars first noted the cycle's end, but pop culture twisted their academic curiosity into sensationalism. By the 1960s, mystics and UFO enthusiasts latched onto the date, weaving elaborate theories about planetary alignments and polar shifts. The irony. The Maya themselves left clear evidence of events beyond 2012. At the ruins of Zoltan, archaeologists found a mural charting lunar cycles stretching another 7,000 years into the future, hardly the work of a culture expecting imminent oblivion. What makes this misinterpretation so revealing is how it reflects our own anxieties. Ancient cultures like the Maya viewed time as circular, where endings and beginnings intertwined. We project our linear, apocalyptic fears onto their cosmology, assuming they shared our fixation on finality. But their astronomers saw harmony in the heavens, a rhythm of rebirth encoded in everything from Venus's movements to the growth cycles of corn. Even their prophecies were less about fortune-telling than understanding recurring patterns. When a Maya scribe tracked the stars, they weren't predicting doom, they were mapping the heartbeat of the universe. This isn't just academic nitpicking. The 2012 frenzy had real consequences, from suicides linked to doomsday paranoia to wasted resources on survivalist scams. Yet buried beneath the hysteria lies a beautiful truth the Maya understood. Time isn't a countdown to catastrophe. It's a spiral where every ending carries the seed of the next beginning. Maybe that's the real prophecy we missed, not a warning about the world's end, but a reminder of its endless capacity to renew. Legend has it that Rome's destiny was written in flames and nearly lost to arrogance. Before Carthage became Rome's greatest rival, before the Punic Wars reshaped the ancient world, a mysterious old woman approached King Tarquinius Superbus with an offer that would alter history. She carried 9 handwritten books filled with prophecies, demanding an exorbitant price. When the king laughed at her audacity, the woman did something shocking. She burned 3 of the books right there in the forum. Then she offered the remaining 6 at the original price. Again, Tarquin refused. 3 more books crackled to ash before his eyes. Finally, with only 3 left, the desperate king paid her full initial demand. Those surviving texts became the Sibylline books, Rome's most sacred oracle, consulted only in moments of existential crisis. Their prophecies weren't vague musings, they were precise tactical advisories wrapped in poetic riddles. When Hannibal's army annihilated Roman legions at Cannae in 216 BCE, decimating 80,000 soldiers in a single afternoon, the Senate turned to these very scrolls. The books didn't offer comfort, they prescribed action. Rome must bury 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls alive in its marketplace as a sacrifice to the underworld gods. Gruesome as it was, the Senate complied. What happened next defied logic. Hannibal, who'd marched to Rome's gates expecting surrender, suddenly halted his campaign. Historians still debate why. Some blame political infighting in Carthage, others point to supply shortages. But to the terrified Romans, the answer was clear: the Sibylline prophecy had worked. The war dragged on for years, but Carthage never again came so close to victory. By the time Scipio Africanus burned their capital in 146 BCE, the book's prediction of ultimate triumph seemed fulfilled down to the last ember. Here's what chills the spine: those burned scrolls might have held the full path to victory. The Sibylline books weren't just fortune-telling, they were strategic guides, detailing which gods to appease and when to strike. The surviving third warned of invasions, plagues, even the rise of Christianity centuries later. But their most enduring legacy was their role in Rome's survival against impossible odds. It makes you wonder what wisdom turned to ash in that forum fire, and what other civilizations might have been saved if they'd heeded their own Sibyl's price. Deep in the heart of China's Shang Dynasty, over 3,000 years ago, generals didn't rely on maps or spies to plan their battles. They consulted the cracks in scorched bones. Imagine the scene: a royal diviner pressing a red-hot bronze rod into the polished shoulder blade of an ox, watching as the heat spider webbed the surface with fractures. To modern eyes, it might look like random damage, but to the Shang rulers, these cracks were messages from the ancestors, a direct hotline to divine strategy. Archaeologists digging at the ancient capital of Yingsu uncovered tens of thousands of these oracle bones, many inscribed with questions that still feel urgent today. If we attack the Qiang tribe next month, will we prevail? Or is the harvest failure caused by displeased spirits? The answers weren't vague omens. They were shockingly specific, often naming exact dates, enemy tribes, and even recommended troop numbers. One bone from 1200 BCE records a king asking whether to send 3,000 or 5,000 soldiers against an uprising, and the cracks allegedly warned that 3,000 would lead to disaster. Historical accounts suggest he ignored the advice and suffered a crushing defeat. What makes these predictions so extraordinary is their physical permanence. Unlike oral prophecies that twist in retelling, the Shang etched both questions and outcomes directly onto the bones, creating a brutal report card for their diviners. Modern scholars have matched these inscriptions to archaeological evidence of battles, finding eerie correlations. At the ruins of a fortified Shang outpost, for example, weapons and mass graves align with the bones warning about a Western invasion in the 8th moon. But here's where it gets stranger. Advanced imaging techniques reveal many oracle bones were reheated after major events, as if the Shang were cross-examining the cracks for deeper meaning. Some show multiple layers of inscriptions, first the prediction, then the result, then new questions probing why certain outcomes occurred. This wasn't superstition. It was an early form of data analysis, with priests tracking patterns across decades of fractures to refine their interpretations. The real genius lay in how the Shang weaponized uncertainty. When bones predicted victory, they were displayed to troops as morale boosters. When warnings appeared, commanders might delay battles or alter tactics. Either way, the system created a powerful feedback loop where faith in the prophecies shaped the very outcomes they foretold. Modern military strategists call this self-fulfilling intelligence, and 3 millennia later, we're still grappling with how much belief influences reality. Those cracked bones didn't just predict history, in many ways they wrote it. In the twilight years of Babylon's glory, as its ziggurats still cast shadows over the Euphrates, a cryptic warning began to circulate among the temple scribes. Etched into fragile clay tablets, the prophecy spoke of a 7th king, one who would turn the gods away and bring about an age of upheaval. At the time, Babylon was ruled by its 6th monarch, Nebuchadnezzar II, a colossus who'd built the legendary Hanging Gardens and crushed rebellions with iron fists. The idea of a 7th king seemed distant, almost hypothetical. But when Nabonidus, a mysterious outsider with no royal blood, seized the throne in 556 BCE, those whispered predictions took on a terrifying urgency. Nabonidus wasn't just an unconventional ruler, he was a walking paradox, a devout antiquarian obsessed with restoring ancient temples, yet accused of neglecting Babylon's own patron god Marduk. He spent years exiled in the Arabian oasis of Tama, leaving his son Belshazzar to govern, a decision that baffled both allies and enemies. Cuneiform tablets from his reign paint a portrait of a man unraveling tradition. One text laments how the festival ceased and the people ate bitterness, while another accuses him of elevating the moon god Sin above all others. To Babylon's priests, this wasn't just heresy, it was the exact chaos the seventh king prophecy had foretold. The most damning evidence comes from the verse account of Nabonidus, a clay cylinder buried by his political enemies. In it, scribes wielded prophecy like a weapon, framing Nabonidus' eccentricities as fulfillment of divine judgment. He changed the rites, mixed up the omens, and did not heed the warnings of the tablets. Even his archaeological digs, meant to glorify past kings, were twisted into signs of madness. When Cyrus the Great of Persia invaded in 539 BCE, Babylon's gates famously swung open without resistance. To the Babylonians, this wasn't military failure. It was the gods abandoning a city ruled by a king they'd already marked for ruin. But here's the twist: modern historians suspect Nabonidus might have been framed. Recent deciphered tablets reveal he was likely a reformer battling corrupt priestly elites. His so-called neglect of Marduk perhaps an attempt to break their monopoly. His exile to Tama, possibly a strategic move to control lucrative trade routes. Even the prophecy itself might have been retrofitted, a smear campaign carved into clay after the fact. Yet the chilling precision of the seventh king narrative raises broader questions. Did the Babylonians possess a template for predicting royal downfalls, or were they masters of rewriting history to fit their myths? That duality between foresight and fabrication haunts every line of those cuneiform tablets. Whether Nabonidus was truly the chaos bringer the prophecy described, or merely a scapegoat for Babylon's decline, one thing is undeniable: the idea of the seventh king became a self-fulfilling omen. The moment his subjects believed the prediction, their faith in his rule crumbled faster than any Persian army could have toppled it. And that's the real power of ancient prophecies, not just that they might predict the future, but that they can sometimes create it. High in the misty glens of 17th century Scotland, a man named Coinage Odhar, better known as the Brahman seer, uttered a prophecy so precise it still chills historians today. While gazing into a small stone with a hole bored through its center, he described a future where strange ships without sails or oars would arrive on the coast, bringing men who would drive Highlanders from their ancestral homes. At the time, his listeners scoffed, ships without sails, impossible. But 3 centuries later, when steamships belching smoke rounded the headlands to enforce the Highland clearances, his words snapped into horrifying focus. The clearances weren't just evictions, they were cultural genocide. Landlords, desperate to profit from sheep grazing, burned cottages with families still inside. Thousands were herded onto overcrowded ships bound for the Americas, their Gaelic songs drowned by the screech of steam whistles. But what makes the Brahman seer's vision uncanny isn't just the ships. It's the details. He spoke of locks black with tears, matching eyewitness accounts of families wading into freezing waters to escape flames. He predicted a time when the plow would rust, foreshadowing how fertile fields became empty grazing land. Even his description of the big house with the 3 false smiles, interpreted as the duplicitous promises of landlords, finds eerie confirmation in legal records where eviction notices were disguised as improvement agreements. Most haunting of all are the paintings. Centuries after his death, artists like Thomas Feed and John Watson Nicol captured scenes straight from the seer's visions. Women clutching infants beside smoldering ruins, children with hollow eyes boarding ships, entire villages reduced to skeletal stone outlines. These aren't generic tragedies, they're his prophecies rendered in pigment and brushstroke. The painting The Last of the Clan shows an old man kneeling on a barren shore, his hand pressed to the earth in farewell. Compare that to the seer's warning: the day will come when the old shall kneel and kiss the stones of their homeland, knowing they'll never see them again. The parallels are too exact to dismiss, yet the Brahan seer's story carries a bitter twist. Legend claims he was executed by a vindictive noblewoman who ordered him thrown into a barrel of burning tar. His final prophecy that her lineage would end with a half-witted heir and that a foreign invader would sleep in her castle's master bed both came true. The last of her line died in an asylum, and during World War II, her ancestral seat, Brahan Castle, became a barracks for Canadian troops. Was he truly a prophet or just a keen observer of human greed? The clearances didn't happen in a vacuum. Landlords had already begun enclosing fields in his lifetime, but his ability to visualize the trauma with such anatomical precision, the ships, the tears, the rusted plow, suggests something beyond mere extrapolation. It's as if he didn't just predict history, he felt it centuries before the first craft collapsed into embers. And that raises an unsettling thought. What if some prophecies aren't forecasts at all, but memories of futures already written in the land itself? Long before telescopes pierced the night sky, the Hopi people of the American Southwest spoke of a celestial omen that would shake the world: the arrival of the Blue Star Kachina. According to oral traditions passed down through generations, this radiant blue visitor would appear when humanity reached a crossroads, heralding a time of great purification. The prophecy describes a star so vivid it would cast shadows at night, its brilliance unmatched by any other celestial body. Modern astronomers listening to these ancient accounts might feel a prickle of recognition because in recent decades we've witnessed phenomena that align with eerie precision to the Hopi vision. Take the Great Comet of 1996, Hyakutake, which blazed across the heavens with an otherworldly blue-green glow, or Comet Neowise in 2020, whose ion tail shimmered with cyan hues visible even in light-polluted cities. But the most compelling connection lies beyond comets' supernovas. In 2023, astronomers detected SN 2023 IXF, a supernova whose light spectrum skewed intensely blue, matching the Kachina's description. The Hopi didn't just predict a celestial event, they specified its color, a detail science couldn't verify until spectrometry existed. Yet the prophecy's true weight lies in its earthly implications. The Blue Star Kachina's appearance isn't just a spectacle, it's a warning. Elders teach that it precedes the return of the Hopi's lost white brother, Pahana, and a period where humanity must choose between harmony and destruction. Climate scientists note a chilling parallel. The years following Hyakutake and Neowise saw unprecedented wildfires, droughts, and pandemics, events the Hopi associate with the purification foretold in their lore. Even the timing fits. Hopi texts suggest the Kachina arrives during the Fifth World, a cycle many scholars correlate with our current geological epoch, the Anthropocene. What makes this prophecy extraordinary is its layered wisdom. Unlike doomsday predictions fixated on annihilation, the Hopi vision centers on transition, a chance to realign with natural law. Theirs isn't a message of despair but accountability, encoded in star lore centuries before telescopes turned skyward. And that raises a humbling thought. Perhaps ancient cultures didn't need advanced optics to understand the cosmos's rhythms. They simply knew how to listen not just to the heavens, but to the Earth's own warnings echoing back. Deep in the vaults of medieval Welsh manuscripts lies a prophecy so vivid it feels ripped from a dream or a nightmare. The legendary wizard Merlin, speaking through the pages of Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, describes a vision that would shape the fate of an island. Two colossal dragons locked in eternal combat, one red as fresh blood, the other white as bleached bone. To the 5th century Britons hearing this tale, the imagery wasn't just poetic. It was a roadmap of invasions yet to come, a cosmic battle between native Celts and Saxon invaders coded in scales and fire. The story unfolds at Dinas Imrais, a mist-shrouded hill fort where King Vortigern attempted to build a tower that kept crumbling overnight. His druids declared the land cursed, only the sacrifice of a fatherless boy could break the spell. Enter Merlin, then just a young seer who revealed the truth. Beneath the hill, two dragons lay trapped in an underground pool, their struggles shaking the earth. As workers dug, the beasts burst forth, and their aerial duel painted the sky with streaks of crimson and ivory. The red dragon, Merlin explained, symbolized the Britons, while the white embodied the Saxons. Though the red dragon would falter, its final victory was assured, a metaphor for Celtic resistance against Germanic tribes flooding Britain's shores. What chills historians isn't the fantasy of battling reptiles, but the prophecy's timing. When Geoffrey wrote this in the 12th century, he cribbed from older Welsh traditions dating back to the actual Saxon invasions of the 5th and 6th centuries, events the Britons couldn't have predicted in Merlin's supposed lifetime. Yet the allegory fits with eerie precision. The white dragon's initial dominance mirrors historical records of Saxon kingdoms like Wessex and Mercia subjugating Celtic territories, while the red dragon's resurgence parallels the eventual Celtic cultural revival under leaders like Rhodri the Great. Even the location holds power. Dinas Emrys sits in Snowdonia, heartland of Welsh resistance against English rule for centuries. The real magic of this prophecy lies in its endurance. When Henry Tudor marched under a red dragon banner at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, he wasn't just rallying troops, he was invoking Merlin's vision to position himself as the Celtic savior against the white dragon Yorkists. Today, that same red dragon grins from Wales' national flag, while archaeological evidence suggests the Saxons did use white serpent motifs on their war banners. Coincidence, perhaps, but when a myth survives 1,500 years, woven into the DNA of a nation's identity, it stops being mere folklore and becomes something far more potent, a story that doesn't just predict history but shapes it. And that's the untold power of Merlin's prophecy. It wasn't a static prediction, it was a living narrative adapted by every generation to explain their struggles. The dragons evolve, from Saxons to Normans, from Tudors to modern Welsh nationalists, but the battle remains eternal. Which makes you wonder, are the best prophecies really about seeing the future or giving people the symbols to survive it? The high peaks of Tibet have guarded secrets for millennia, but few are as startling as the ancient prophecy of the iron birds. Nestled within Buddhist texts dating back over 1,000 years, these cryptic verses describe massive metal creatures that would one day darken the sky, carrying multitudes across continents faster than the wind. To monks copying these words by butter lamp light, such visions must have seemed pure fantasy until December 17, 1903, when the Wright brothers' flyer shuddered into the air at Kitty Hawk. What makes this prediction so uncanny isn't just its broad strokes, it's the granular details. The Terma scriptures, hidden teachings revealed by enlightened masters, specify that these birds would nest on water yet drink fire, a near-perfect metaphor for early seaplanes refueling with combustible petrol. Another passage warns that when the iron birds multiply, mountains will tremble, foreshadowing both the sonic booms of jet aircraft and the environmental toll of modern aviation. Even the timing aligns. Tibetan lore posited this era would arrive when the iron snake circles the Earth, a possible nod to the transcontinental railroads that industrialized travel decades before airplanes dominated. Vintage footage of aviation's infancy brings these prophecies to life in chilling detail. Watch a 1927 newsreel of Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis bobbing in the waves before takeoff, a literal iron bird nesting on water, or the grainy films of Zeppelins, their gondolas packed with passengers mirroring texts that describe silver serpents bearing souls. The most haunting parallel emerges in World War II footage. Swarms of B-17 bombers eclipsing the sun over Europe, exactly as the prophecies warned. Like locusts, they shall blot out the light. Scholars debate whether these texts were visionary or merely observational. Some argue that Himalayan traders might have seen early Chinese kites or Mongol siege engines extrapolating future technologies. But the Kangya, a canonical Buddhist text, includes a diagram of a winged vehicle with precise proportions resembling a modern airliner's cross-section, complete with seats stacked like rice baskets. That level of specificity defies coincidence. Perhaps the most profound insight lies in how the prophecies frame this technological leap, not as triumph but as a spiritual test. The texts caution that iron birds would bring both honey and poison, uniting humanity while also enabling war and ecological disruption. In an age where a single jumbo jet emits as much CO2 per passenger as a year of home electricity, that duality feels painfully prescient. The monks weren't just predicting machines, they foresaw the choices those machines would force upon us and the wisdom we'd need to wield them well. For nearly 2,000 years, one biblical prophecy has sparked more fear and debate than almost any other: the mark of the beast from Revelation chapter 13. Let no one buy or sell except one who has the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. The text warns, specifying this number as 666. To early Christians facing Roman persecution, this likely symbolized emperor worship demanding loyalty oaths to Nero, whose name in Hebrew numerology adds up to that infamous number. But flip open a history book and you'll find this prophecy constantly reinventing itself to haunt each new technological age. In the 1930s, it was Social Security numbers. By the 80s, supermarket barcodes sparked panic when conspiracy theorists noticed that the guard bars resembled the number 6. Today, the focus has shifted to RFID chips, those tiny implants already used to track pets and even some employees in high-security workplaces. The parallels seem uncanny: a subdermal chip that could theoretically store personal data linked to financial transactions, just as Revelation describes. Swedish biohacker Hans Sjöblad made headlines in 2015 when he implanted an NFC chip in his hand to unlock doors and share contact details. While harmless, the spectacle of humans upgrading with tech sent shockwaves through religious communities. What makes this prophecy so endlessly adaptable isn't just its vagueness, it's humanity's primal fear of losing autonomy. Theologians note that Revelation's original Greek uses the word charagma for mark, a term specifically tied to imperial seals on contracts or military discharge papers. In essence, it warned against pledging allegiance to corrupt systems, yet every generation projects its own anxieties onto that warning. During the Black Death, people saw the mark in quarantine symbols daubed on plague houses. In Victorian England, phrenologists claimed the beast's number could be decoded in skull shapes. Even credit cards briefly became a suspect in the 90s when some noticed magnetic stripes held 3 6-digit security codes. The real lesson here might not be about predicting the future, but understanding how prophecy operates as a mirror. When the Y2K panic hit, churches stockpiled food, fearing computerized banking would fulfill Revelation's commerce restrictions. When COVID vaccines rolled out, QR code health passports became the new mark in online sermons. Each iteration says less about divine foresight and more about how we process change, especially when technology outpaces ethics. Perhaps the most chilling twist: the original number 666 might have been a scribble error. Ancient fragments like Papyrus 115 show early Christians wrote it as 616, the numerical value of Caesar God in Latin. If true, it means 2 millennia of panic hinge on a single misplaced letter. And that raises a question far scarier than any microchip. What if we've been fearing the wrong beast all along? The eerie rhythm of American history holds a macabre pattern some call the Curse of Tippecanoe, a 20-year cycle of presidential deaths that began with William Henry Harrison and stretched like a shadow across a century. It all traces back to a bitter confrontation in 1811, when then-General Harrison defeated Shawnee leader Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe. As the story goes, Tecumseh's brother Tenskwatawa, a spiritual leader known as the Prophet, placed a curse on Harrison and future White House occupants, declaring, "Harrison will die in office, and every great chief chosen every 20 years thereafter will also die." At first, it seemed like empty vengeance. Harrison won the presidency in 1840, exactly 20 years after his military victory, and delivered the longest inaugural address in history on a freezing March day without a coat. Pneumonia struck days later, killing him after just 31 days in office. A tragic fluke, surely. But then Abraham Lincoln, elected in 1860, was assassinated in 1865. James Garfield, elected in 1880, fell to an assassin's bullet in 1881. William McKinley, re-elected in 1900, was shot in 1901. Warren Harding, elected in 1920, died of a sudden illness in 1923. Franklin Roosevelt, elected to his third term in 1940, passed in office in 1945. And John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960, was assassinated in 1963. The pattern isn't just about death, it's about timing. Each president was elected or re-elected in a year ending in 0, and each died in office at roughly 20-year intervals. Skeptics argue it's mere coincidence, a statistical quirk amplified by selective memory. After all, Zachary Taylor, elected 1848, and Grover Cleveland, elected 1884, also died in office outside the cycle. But the curse's grip on the public imagination only tightened after Reagan's near miss in 1981. Elected in 1980, he survived an assassination attempt by inches, a bullet ricocheting off his limousine and lodging an inch from his heart. To believers, this was the curse weakening, its power finally broken. What chills historians isn't just the pattern's precision, but how it intersects with pivotal moments. Lincoln's death reshaped Reconstruction. McKinley's assassination brought Teddy Roosevelt's progressive era. Kennedy's murder marked the end of Camelot. Had any survived, history might have veered in unrecognizable directions. The curse's legacy lingers in modern security protocols, Secret Service details, bulletproof glass, all tightened after these tragedies. Whether supernatural or statistical, the Tippecanoe curse remains a haunting reminder of how thin the thread of fate can be. And that leaves us wondering, was it really broken or just biding its time? When Philip II of Macedon stood before the Oracle at Delphi, he carried the same question as every ambitious king before him: what legacy would his bloodline leave? The answer came not as a detailed map of conquests, but as a single, electrifying word: lion. At the time, this might have seemed poetic flattery, but history would soon reveal it as one of the most precise prophecies ever uttered. That lion, of course, was his infant son Alexander, a boy who would tear through continents with the same ferocity as the beast foretold at his cradle. The brilliance of this prediction lies in its layered meaning. In ancient symbolism, lions weren't just strong, they were boundless. They represented unchallenged dominion, the kind that ignores rivers or mountains as mere inconveniences. And that's exactly how Alexander waged war. By the age of 32, he'd demolished the Persian Empire, marched into the Hindu Kush, and founded cities stretching from Egypt to India. His tactics mirrored a lion's hunt: relentless speed, unpredictable pivots, and an instinct for his enemy's weakest point. Even his famous mane of hair became part of the legend, immortalized in coins and sculptures that echoed the oracle's imagery. But here's where the prophecy turns chilling. The oracle didn't just predict greatness, she hinted at its cost. Greek lore often paired lions with tragedy. Hercules' first labor was slaying the Nemean lion, a beast no weapon could pierce. Similarly, Alexander's empire proved as fragile as it was vast. His death at 32, likely from poison or disease, left his conquests to be torn apart by squabbling generals. The lion's roar silenced too soon, just as the unspoken half of the prophecy might have warned. What makes Delphi's foresight so unsettling is how it played with expectations. Philip likely hoped for reassurance about his own reign, yet the oracle bypassed him entirely to spotlight his son. This wasn't a generic blessing, it was a laser-focused vision of one specific destiny. Modern historians note that the priests at Delphi had extensive networks of informants, and Macedonia's rising power was no secret. But even if they'd glimpsed Philip's ambitions, how could they have envisioned the scale of what followed? Alexander didn't just exceed his father's dreams, he redefined what a single life could achieve. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether the oracle predicted Alexander's rise, but whether she shaped it. Stories of the lion prophecy spread through Macedon's courts, becoming part of Alexander's mythos before he could walk. Imagine growing up knowing you were destined to be that. Would it forge you or break you? In the end, the prophecy didn't just foresee history, it became fuel for the very fire it described. And that's the true power of ancient predictions. They don't just tell us what's coming. Sometimes they help build it. In the year 1519, as the Aztec Empire stood at the height of its power, priests in the capital of Tenochtitlan began reporting nightmares. Not the vague terrors of ordinary dreams, but visions so precise they sent Emperor Moctezuma II into a paralyzing dread. Ancient codices warned of Quetzalcoatl's return, the feathered serpent god who'd sailed east long ago, promising to come back in the year 1 read. And by eerie coincidence, Spanish ships appeared off the Gulf Coast that exact year, their square sails billowing like serpent wings over the horizon. The parallels between myth and reality were too striking to ignore. Quetzalcoatl was said to be fair-skinned and bearded, just like the conquistador Hernán Cortés. The god's traditional departure date, recorded in the Codex Chimalpopoca, aligned perfectly with the Spanish landing. Even the weapons matched. Aztec lore described Quetzalcoatl wielding sticks that spat thunder, an uncanny resemblance to muskets. Moctezuma, steeped in prophecy, hesitated. Were these visitors divine or mortal? His uncertainty became Cortés' greatest weapon. Archaeologists studying pre-Columbian codices found something even more unsettling. The Florentine Codex, compiled after the conquest, depicts Cortés wearing Quetzalcoatl's iconic plumed headdress, a detail likely added by Aztec scribes trying to process the catastrophe. But earlier manuscripts like the Codex Borgia show the god's return preceding an era of upheaval, with pyramids crumbling and sacred fires extinguished. That's exactly what unfolded when Cortés exploited Moctezuma's doubt, marching into Tenochtitlan under the guise of diplomacy while plotting its downfall. Yet the real tragedy lies in what the prophecy obscured. Quetzalcoatl wasn't just a harbinger of destruction. He was a cultural hero who taught the Aztecs agriculture, astronomy, and ethics. His predicted return should have been a moment of renewal. Instead, it became a psychological trap, making Moctezuma second-guess every move against an enemy who showed no such hesitation. By the time the emperor realized his mistake, smallpox and siege had already doomed his empire. Modern scholars debate whether the prophecy was twisted by hindsight or actively manipulated. Spanish friars later rewrote Aztec texts to frame Cortés as a divine instrument, justifying colonization. But the core of the story remains, a civilization so bound to its myths that it couldn't see the mortal threat until too late. The deeper lesson isn't about failed predictions, it's about how even the most sacred prophecies can become mirrors, reflecting our fears more clearly than our future. The Vikings didn't just fear winter, they prophesied one that would never end. Nestled in the poetic Edda, the ancient Norse vision of Ragnarök describes the Fimbulwinter, a crushing 3-year freeze where snows blow from all directions, the sun turns black, and brothers slay each other for scraps. For centuries, this was dismissed as myth, until climate scientists drilling ice cores in Greenland uncovered evidence of a catastrophe that matched the prophecy with chilling precision. Around 536 CE, a volcanic eruption so massive it dwarfed Krakatoa ejected a sulfurous veil across the northern hemisphere, plunging Europe into 18 months of twilight. Crops failed, livestock perished. Mass graves from Scandinavia to Constantinople tell the same story, a generation that starved beneath an ash-choked sky. What makes the Fimbulwinter prophecy so unnerving isn't just its accuracy, it's the artwork that preserved its memory. Viking carvings on rune stones and shield grips depict wolves swallowing the sun, skeletal trees, and figures huddled around feeble fires. These aren't generic doomsday scenes, they're forensic records of survival. One 8th century tapestry discovered in the Oseberg ship burial shows a procession of emaciated horses, their ribs visible pulling a wagon laden with empty grain sacks. Historians now recognize this as a cultural heirloom, passed down to warn of a repeated calamity. Even the timing aligns. Norse sagas place Ragnarök after 3 brutal winters, mirroring the volcanic cooling pulses detected in tree rings from 536 to 539 CE. But the real genius of the prophecy lies in its ecological insights. The Völuspá, the most detailed account of Ragnarök, doesn't just describe cold, it specifies how the world unravels. The eagle screams, pale-beaked, tearing corpses, a line modern biologists link to the explosion of scavenger birds during the 536 famine. Rivers boil and poison the sky, a possible nod to acid rain from volcanic fallout. Most strikingly, the prophecy claims the Fimbulwinter precedes a rebirth. The Earth rises again, green and fair. Ice core data confirms temperatures rebounded abruptly after 540 CE, birthing a climatic golden age that fueled Viking expansion. This wasn't blind pessimism, it was cyclical wisdom. The Norse didn't view Ragnarök as the end, but as a reset button pressed by nature itself. Their artists carved this duality into every depiction. Alongside scenes of despair, you'll find saplings sprouting from Yggdrasil's roots and new gods playing chess in sunlight. Today, as we grapple with our own climate crises, the Fimbulwinter prophecy takes on new urgency. The Vikings didn't just predict disaster, they encoded survival strategies in their myths. Their rune stones aren't just warnings, they're guidebooks for enduring what's coming. And that raises a humbling thought. What if the ancients weren't foretelling our future, but reminding us they'd already lived it? In 1239, as the Irish Saint Malachy lay on his deathbed, he whispered a series of cryptic Latin phrases that would haunt the Vatican for centuries, a list of 112 short mottos, each supposedly corresponding to a future pope. At first, these prophecies gathered dust in Vatican archives, dismissed as medieval curiosities. But as centuries passed and each papal reign unfolded, scholars began noticing eerie patterns. The mottos didn't just vaguely fit, they seemed to pierce through history with surgical precision, encapsulating each pope's defining traits, origins, or crises in a handful of words. Take de Meditate Luni, from the half moon. This phrase marked Pope John Paul I's 33-day reign in 1978. At first glance, it seems arbitrary. Then you learn he was born during a half moon, elected during a half moon, died during a half moon, and his funeral coincided with, you guessed it, another half moon. Or de Balneae Etrurii, from the baths of Etruria. This described Pope Pius III, whose family crest featured hot springs and whose brief papacy was cut short by an infection from, wait for it, soaking in therapeutic baths. The coincidences pile up like votive candles. Urban VIII's motto, Lilium et Rosa, the lily and the rose, mirrored his reign's duality: peace with France, whose symbol is the lily, and war with England, the rose. But the prophecy that sends chills down modern spines is the final one. In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish his flock amid many tribulations. When these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. For centuries, this was ignored as apocalyptic fluff until you realize there are only 2 popes left before the prophecy's end. The current Pope Francis is the 111th. The next would be 112, Peter the Roman. What makes this prediction so electrifying isn't just its countdown-like structure, it's the detail that Pope Francis himself seems to lean into the mystery. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, he's the first pope in history to choose the name Francis after Saint Francis of Assisi, who famously rebuilt a crumbling church. Some scholars argue this aligns with Malachi's extreme persecution line, as Francis' papacy has faced unprecedented scandals and declining congregations. Even more striking, his papal coat of arms features a star and spikenard flower, symbols tied to Rome's ancient legends of renewal. Skeptics, of course, cry coincidence. They note the Malachi prophecies were likely forged in the 1590s, backdated to seem ancient. Others point out that vague mottos can be retrofitted to fit almost any narrative, like astrological readings. But defenders highlight unsettling specifics. No one could have predicted Pius X's motto, Ignis Ardens, burning fire, would foreshadow his death at the outbreak of World War I, when Europe literally went up in flames. Or that Benedict XVI, Gloria Olivi, glory of the olive, would mirror his attempted peacemaking with Islam, whose symbol is the olive branch. The real tension lies in what hasn't happened yet. If the list is accurate, the next Pope, Peter the Roman, would preside over the Church's apocalyptic collapse. Some interpret this literally, a pope from Rome itself, perhaps taking the name Peter to invoke Christ's first apostle. Others see symbolism, a leader navigating the Church through its modern crises, from financial scandals to empty pews. Either way, the prophecy's power isn't just in its predictions, but in how it shaped centuries of Vatican intrigue. Popes have reportedly consulted the list upon election, some even altering their heraldry to avoid matching its darker verses. Perhaps the most fascinating twist is how Malachi's mottos reflect a deeper truth about prophecy itself. They're less about seeing the future than holding up a mirror to the present, revealing how even the most powerful institutions are haunted by the stories they tell about themselves. Whether Peter the Roman is destiny or delusion, one thing's certain: the weight of those 1239 whispers grows heavier with each passing conclave. And that's enough to make even skeptics glance at the Vatican walls and wonder. Long before steam engines carved ribbons of iron across the American West, the Cherokee people spoke of a vision that would alter the land forever. A monstrous iron snake that would slither from ocean to ocean, its belly filled with fire and smoke. Tribal elders warned this creature would bring both connection and destruction, stitching distant lands together while suffocating the old ways beneath its weight. At the time, such a prophecy must have seemed like myth. But by 1869, when the final golden spike was driven at Promontory Summit, Utah, completing the Transcontinental Railroad, the iron snake had become undeniable reality. What makes this prophecy so unsettling is how literally it manifested. Early Cherokee descriptions didn't just predict trains, they captured their essence. Witnesses spoke of the snake's jointed body mirroring the segmented rail cars. They described its scales shining like whetstones, a perfect match for rain-slicked tracks glinting under moonlight. Even the rhythmic chugging of steam engines echoed tribal warnings about the snake's breath coming in great pants. But the most chilling parallel lies in the prophecy's social impact. Cherokee seers had foreseen that the iron snake would carry away the children, a metaphor realized when rail networks enabled Native American boarding schools to forcibly relocate indigenous youth far from their families. Vintage footage from the 1870s brings this vision to life in eerie detail. Watch those grainy black and white films of locomotives snaking through the Rockies, the way their smoke plumes coil skyward like serpentine breath, or how their headlamps cut through darkness like predatory eyes. The famous Andrew Russell photograph of the Golden Spike ceremony even shows laborers perched along the Central Pacific's locomotive like riders on a massive beast, an image that would have made any Cherokee elder shudder. Yet the prophecy's true depth lies in its duality. The iron snake wasn't purely a harbinger of doom. Cherokee oral tradition noted it would also bear gifts from distant tribes, anticipating the railroad's role in transporting goods, ideas, and cultural exchange. Contemporary accounts describe tribes adapting ingeniously using rail lines to transport ceremonial regalia between reservations or sell handcrafted goods in eastern cities. This nuance separates the Cherokee vision from simplistic doomsaying. It recognized technological progress as a paradox, both eroding tradition and creating unforeseen opportunities. Modern geographers have uncovered another layer to this prophecy. The original Cherokee trading paths often followed the same natural corridors later claimed by railroad engineers, river valleys, mountain passes, and prairie swells. Some scholars argue this wasn't coincidence, but evidence that indigenous knowledge of the land indirectly shaped the iron snake's path. In that light, the prophecy becomes something even more profound. Not just a prediction of trains, but a lament for landscapes already marked by ancient footsteps now buried beneath steel. The iron snake's legacy still writhes beneath America's surface. Subway tunnels, bullet trains, and shipping routes all follow the same basic logic as those first transcontinental tracks. And that raises a haunting question: if the Cherokee could foresee railroads so clearly, what other transformations might their descendants be anticipating today? Perhaps the answer lies not in dismissing these visions as folklore, but in listening for the truths coiled within their metaphors. After all, every generation faces its own iron snakes, technologies that promise connection at the price of change. The real prophecy was never about the train itself, but about how we choose to ride it. On October 13, 1917, 70,000 people stood in a muddy field near Fatima, Portugal, their faces turned upward as rain lashed their coats. They'd come to witness a miracle promised months earlier by 3 shepherd children, a vision of the Virgin Mary who'd foretold this exact date for a celestial sign. Skeptics scoffed, journalists arrived ready to debunk mass hysteria, but what unfolded next would defy every logical explanation, etching itself into history as one of the most widely witnessed supernatural events of the modern age. As noon approached, the clouds tore open like a curtain, revealing not the familiar sun, but a spinning silver disk pulsing with colors no human eye should have been able to bear. Witnesses, from devout peasants to atheist reporters, described it as a diamond wheel hurling shafts of ruby, emerald, and violet light across the landscape. Then, without warning, the sun tore loose from the sky. It zigzagged downward in a dizzying spiral, radiating heat so intense that soaked clothes dried instantly. Farmers miles away swore they saw the sun dancing, while others fell to their knees, convinced the world was ending. For 12 minutes, the laws of physics seemed suspended until the sun snapped back into place, leaving no trace of the chaos except the stunned silence of the crowd. What makes the miracle of the sun so unnerving isn't just the scale of witnesses, it's how precisely it mirrors ancient prophecies about solar deities. The Aztec Tanatia, a god depicted as a fiery disk with clawed rays, was said to demand movement, like a drunkard, across the sky during times of upheaval. Hindu texts describe Surya's chariot stalling mid-heaven as an omen of cosmic reckoning. Even the Bible's book of Joshua mentions the sun standing still, a phenomenon Fatima's events inverted with terrifying symmetry. Scientists have spent a century trying to rationalize the event. Some propose mass hallucination triggered by the children's fervent prophecies, except the phenomenon was seen by people kilometers away who knew nothing of the visions. Others suggest a rare atmospheric refraction, though nothing in meteorological records matches the sun's reported movements. The Vatican's own investigators found no natural explanation, declaring it a sign beyond human contrivance. Perhaps the most chilling detail lies in the children's earlier warnings. Months before the miracle, they described visions of a lady brighter than the sun, who spoke of impending darkness, a prophecy fulfilled by the global turmoil of World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic that followed. To believers, the dancing sun wasn't just a spectacle. It was a warning etched in celestial fire, echoing a truth humanity keeps rediscovering. When the skies themselves seem to unravel, the earth below rarely stays still for long. According to ancient Hindu cosmology, time doesn't move in a straight line. It spirals through 4 vast epochs called yugas, each one darker and more chaotic than the last. We're living in the Kali Yuga, the final and most turbulent age, a period prophesied to drown humanity in greed, illusion, and reckless innovation. Written over 2,000 years ago, the Mahabharata and Puranas describe this era with eerie specificity. Men will fix their minds on wealth alone, kings will become thieves, and the earth will be crowded with temples replaced by shops. Sound familiar? Step into any modern metropolis, glass towers scraping the sky, neon signs flickering over crowded streets, the incessant buzz of transactions, and you'll see the Kali Yuga reflected in every pixelated advertisement and algorithmic trade. But what's truly chilling isn't just the prediction of materialism, it's the details. The Vishnu Purana warns that in Kali Yuga, humanity will worship wealth as divinity. A prophecy that takes on grim humor when you notice banks designed like cathedrals or the way smartphones have become handheld shrines to consumerism. The texts even forecast a society obsessed with superficial beauty, where clothing alone defines virtue, foreshadowing influencer culture centuries before social media existed. Yet the most striking parallel lies in technology. Ancient seers spoke of machines that think and vehicles that move without beasts, descriptions that align uncomfortably well with AI and self-driving cars. The brilliance of the Yuga cycle isn't just its foresight, it's its structure. Unlike linear doomsday prophecies, it recognizes decay and renewal as inseparable. Kali Yuga's rampant technology isn't purely destructive. The Agni Purana hints that fireless light, electricity, and sky chariots, airplanes, will also connect humanity in ways unimaginable to its authors. This duality plays out in modern life. The same internet that spreads misinformation also preserves ancient texts. The same industrial complex polluting the earth accelerates green energy. Perhaps the most profound insight lies in timing. Hindu astronomers calculated Kali Yuga's duration at 432,000 years, a span that dwarfs human history. If they're right, we're still in its infancy, stumbling through an age destined to grow far stranger. The Bhagavata Purana claims that by Kali Yuga's end, clouds will rain death, a line that takes on new weight in the shadow of nuclear arsenals and bioengineering. Yet even this darkness carries hope. The cycle promises a reset, a return to the golden Satya Yuga, where truth outweighs profit. Until then, the prophecies whisper a challenge, not to resist the age, but to navigate its currents with eyes wide open. After all, the ancients didn't just predict our world, they mapped its moral crossroads. The question is whether we'll recognize the signs before the wheel turns again. Before the flames engulfed Troy's towers, before the Greek warriors crept from the belly of their wooden deception, an older warning echoed through the ancient world, one etched not in epic poetry, but in the feverish visions of the Erythraean Sibyl. Her prophecy, known as the threefold curse, foretold Troy's doom with chilling specificity. First, the land will bleed gold for a stolen bride. Then, the wise will be blinded by pride. Last, the gods themselves will enter unseen, bearing gifts that are not what they seem. At first glance, it sounds like poetic abstraction, but when you examine the artifacts left behind, centuries of Greek pottery depicting the Trojan War, you realize every brushstroke confirms her words. Take the famous Mykonos vase, crafted around 670 BCE, a century before Homer's Iliad was written. Its panels show the curse unfolding in visual hieroglyphs. The first scene, Paris clutching Helen, her golden robes mirroring the ransom priam, would later offer the Greeks literal gold spilled for a stolen queen. The second, Cassandra, Troy's prophetess, her wild eyes wide as she warns of the horse, her hands bound by soldiers who dismiss her as mad. And finally, the horse itself, its wooden flanks teeming with armed men, its gaping mouth a grotesque mockery of divine favor. This wasn't just art, it was a Sibylline prophecy rendered in clay. What makes the threefold curse so unnerving isn't just its accuracy, it's how each phase manipulated human nature. The gold phase exploited greed, luring Paris with Helen's dowry. The pride phase blinded Troy's elders to Cassandra's wisdom because her truth offended their sense of superiority. And the final betrayal, it weaponized faith itself. The Trojans didn't just accept the horse as a gift, they revered it, hauling it inside their walls as an offering to Athena. The Sibyl's genius was recognizing that curses aren't just events, they're psychological traps, each step calibrated to exploit a different weakness. Modern archaeologists have found eerie corroboration in lesser-known pottery shards. A fragment from Corinth shows the horse's wheels groaning under its own weight, a detail mirroring the Sibyl's warning about gifts that strain the earth. Another depicts Greek soldiers emerging from the horse's belly like serpents from a Trojan womb, echoing her description of birth reversed. Even the timing aligns. The Sibyl reportedly delivered her prophecy before Paris ever set sail for Sparta, suggesting she didn't just foresee the war but scripted its moral arc. Yet the real horror lies in the curse's longevity. Long after Troy's ashes cooled, the Sibyl's words became a blueprint for historical tragedies. Caesar's assassination followed the same three acts: the gold of Brutus's bribes, the pride of senators who believed they could control the aftermath, and the gift of knives hidden beneath togas. Even the Trojan horse's legacy endures. Modern cyberattacks disguise malware in harmless emails, exploiting the same human instinct to trust what appears divine. The Sibyl didn't just predict one city's fall, she uncovered a formula for betrayal that transcends millennia, and that's the curse's true power. It wasn't locked in the past. It's a mirror reflecting the timeless truth that humanity's greatest vulnerabilities aren't its walls, but the hubris, greed, and faith that build and topple them. Which makes you wonder, if the Sibyl's words still resonate today, what other ancient warnings are we still sleepwalking toward? Long before messiahs walked the pages of the Bible or the Quran, Persia's Zoroastrian priests spoke of the Saoshyant, a radiant savior born of a virgin who would one day descend into a world drowning in darkness. The parallels to later religious traditions are striking. But what makes this ancient prediction truly remarkable is how it weaves together threads from across the ancient world, creating a tapestry of hope that transcends cultures. According to the Avesta, Zoroastrianism's sacred texts, the Saoshyant wouldn't just appear in triumph, he would emerge after a cataclysmic winter, when humanity had been reduced to hiding in caves, surviving on meals so meager they'd fit in the hollow of a hand. Sound familiar? The Norse Fimbulwinter, the Hopi purification, even biblical prophecies of famine all echo this same motif of suffering preceding renewal. But the Saoshyant's role goes beyond mere survival. He's described as a cosmic judge who will literally melt the mountains with his gaze, purifying the earth in rivers of molten metal. Those who pass this trial, the righteous will walk unharmed, while the wicked will be cleansed from existence. This vision of apocalypse as both punishment and rebirth appears in startlingly similar forms across traditions. The Hindu Kalki avatar rides a white horse, wielding a flaming sword to end the Kali Yuga. Christianity's Book of Revelation depicts Christ returning amidst fire to separate the faithful from the damned. Even the Quran's Mahdi shares the Saoshyant's promise of restoring divine justice after an age of corruption. What's fascinating isn't just the overlap, it's the shared narrative structure. These prophecies aren't standalone predictions, they're part of a recurring archetype that psychologist Carl Jung called the monomyth. The Saoshyant, like all messianic figures, follows a threefold path: a fall into chaos, a trial by fire, and a final restoration of balance. Archaeologists have found evidence this pattern predates Zoroaster himself. A Bronze Age seal from Mesopotamia shows a solar deity battling a serpent, an image that later appears in both Persian and Judeo-Christian traditions. The real question isn't whether these prophecies copied each other, but why this particular vision resonated across deserts and mountains, from the steppes of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean. Perhaps it's because the Saoshyant myth taps into something fundamental about human psychology, our need to believe that no matter how deep the darkness, dawn is written into the fabric of existence. The details may change: the molten metal becomes a flaming sword, the cave dwellers become Noah's survivors, but the promise remains unshakable. Destruction is never the end, only the precursor to rebirth. And that may be the most enduring prophecy of all, because whether you call it the Saoshyant, the Second Coming, or the Mahdi, the message is the same. Civilizations rise and fall, but hope is older than time, and it always finds a way to rekindle itself in the human heart. High in the Andes, where the clouds cling to ancient stone, the Incas whispered of a prophecy that would shape their empire's darkest hour. Pachacuti, the warrior king who transformed the Inca state into a sprawling civilization, was said to have left behind more than terraced farms and soaring temples. He foretold his own return in a time of crisis, when men with faces like the moon would arrive from across the sea. Decades before Spanish sails appeared on the horizon, this prediction was passed down through generations, etched into the collective memory of a people who would soon face annihilation. When Francisco Pizarro and his conquistadors landed in 1532, the prophecy snapped into terrifying focus. To the Inca, these pale-skinned strangers, their armor glinting like cold moonlight, matched Pachacuti's description with eerie precision. Chroniclers like Garcilaso de la Vega recorded how Emperor Atahualpa, upon hearing of the Spaniards' arrival, reportedly turned pale and murmured, "This is what was foretold." The invaders didn't just bring guns and disease, they carried the weight of a prediction that had loomed over the Andes for a century. Machu Picchu, the hidden citadel often linked to Pachacuti's reign, stands as a silent witness to this collision of prophecy and history. Recent archaeological work reveals how the site was abruptly abandoned around the time of the conquest. Its sacred stones left untouched, almost as if the Incas were preserving it for the king's eventual return. Spanish accounts describe finding villages where people spoke of a time of waiting, convinced their ruler would emerge from the mountains to drive out the invaders. Even today, Quechua oral traditions tell of Pachacuti's spirit dwelling in the highest peaks, biding his time. But the real tragedy of this prophecy lies in how it was weaponized. The Spanish, quick to exploit indigenous beliefs, spread rumors that their arrival was the promised return, twisting Pachacuti's warning into a tool of subjugation. Dominican friars claimed Pizarro was the new Pachacuti, sent not to save the Inca but to replace them. This psychological warfare shattered resistance faster than muskets could. By the time Manco Inca led his rebellion in 1536, the prophecy had become a double-edged sword, simultaneously fueling hope and sowing fatal hesitation. What makes this prediction so haunting isn't just its accuracy, it's the unresolved tension it embodies. Pachacuti's return was never meant to be literal. It symbolized cyclical renewal, the Andean belief that time spirals rather than marches forward. The Spaniards, steeped in linear Christian eschatology, couldn't comprehend this nuance. To them, prophecies had clear endpoints. To the Inca, the prophecy still hums in the wind through Machu Picchu's empty corridors, waiting for the wheel of time to complete its turn. And that raises a question that lingers like mountain mist. When a prophecy is fulfilled by the wrong hands, does it die, or simply sleep until the true hour comes? Buried beneath the ruins of ancient Babylon, a cracked clay tablet tells the story of a god abandoned by his own people. and the shocking moment he would return in glory. Known as the Marduk prophecy, this 2,000-year-old text describes how the patron deity of Babylon would one day flee his temple in disgust, allowing his city to fall into chaos, only to return centuries later when its rulers proved worthy. At first glance, it reads like myth, but when archaeologists pieced together the tablet's timeline, they uncovered something astonishing. This wasn't just a divine fable. It was a coded play-by-play of Babylon's most tumultuous era, a prophecy that came true with spine-chilling accuracy. The text begins with Marduk's ominous warning, "I will depart for the land of Hatti, and Babylon will endure years of famine." To modern historians, this line isn't mystical, it's forensic. Hatti refers to the Hittite kingdom, Babylon's ancient rival, and sure enough, in 1595 BCE, Hittite King Merlin I sacked Babylon, hauling Marduk's statue back to his capital as spoils of war. For the Babylonians, this wasn't just military defeat, it was the literal departure of their god. The prophecy's next lines mirror historical records with eerie precision. The temples will decay, the people will wail, and kings will rise and fall like reeds in the wind. Cuneiform archives confirm Babylon plunged into a 70-year dark age, with 6 weak rulers overthrown in quick succession. Then comes the twist. The prophecy claims Marduk would eventually return by his own will when a new dynasty earned his favor, and that's exactly what happened. When the Kassite king Agum II recovered the statue in the 1400s BCE, inscriptions describe his envoys negotiating with the Hittites not as conquerors but as humble petitioners. The Marduk prophecy frames this as divine choice. "I lifted my eyes to the distant mountains and chose a shepherd to restore my throne." The Kassites, originally outsiders, rebranded themselves as Marduk's chosen redeemers, using the prophecy to legitimize their rule. What chills scholars isn't just the prediction's accuracy, it's how it shaped history in real time. Later kings like Nebuchadnezzar I explicitly invoked the prophecy after recapturing stolen gods from Elam, casting themselves as Marduk's instruments. The text became a political blueprint, teaching that legitimacy flowed not from bloodline, but from the gods' perceived approval. But here's where it gets darker. The prophecy's final lines warn that Marduk would abandon Babylon again if its rulers grew corrupt. A threat later kings turned into a weapon. When Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, he quoted the Marduk prophecy in his famous cylinder, claiming the god had wanted him to depose the decadent Nabonidus. The prophecy, meant to protect Babylon, ultimately justified its downfall. This duality between divine foresight and political manipulation haunts every line of that cracked tablet. Whether Marduk's movements were truly predicted or retrofitted to history, one thing's undeniable: the belief in this prophecy altered the decisions of empires. And that raises a haunting question when a god's return is foretold. Does it become destiny or just an excuse for the next conqueror to claim they were chosen? Centuries before scientific instruments could track climate patterns, Ireland's druids were reading the future in the silent language of trees. Deep in the bogs of County Meath, archaeologists have uncovered oak timbers carved with cryptic Ogham script, ancient markings that don't just record names or prayers, but a chillingly precise prediction. "When the ash wanes and the oak weeps, the breath of the land shall still." At first dismissed as poetic metaphor, this inscription took on grim significance when researchers matched its estimated date, 540 CE, to ice core samples revealing a catastrophic volcanic winter. The Druids hadn't just foreseen the famine that would grip Ireland, they'd embedded the warning in the very substance they revered most, wood itself. Modern dendrochronologist scientists who study tree rings found startling corroboration in preserved bog oaks from the same era. The rings show an abrupt, stunted growth pattern around 536, followed by 2 years of near-total stagnation. This matches global evidence of a volcanic eruption so massive it dimmed the sun for 18 months, triggering crop failures from Europe to Asia. But what chills researchers isn't just the accuracy of the Druids' prediction, it's how they encoded it. The Ogham carving specifies the ash wains, a reference to Fraxinus excelsior trees that modern botany confirms are hypersensitive to temperature drops. Ash rings from the period show cellular deformities resembling stress scars, while oaks exhibit frost rings, rare anomalies caused by sudden midsummer chills. The Druids hadn't guessed. They documented ecological signals invisible to the untrained eye. The prophecy's second layer reveals even deeper sophistication. The oak weeps likely describes abnormal resin bleeding, a phenomenon still observed in stressed Quercus robur trees during modern droughts. But the Druids paired this observation with a cultural memory, an older tale of a similar famine triggered by the sky's breath turning foul. By cross-referencing living trees with oral tradition, they'd essentially created a prehistoric climate model. This wasn't mysticism, it was early empirical science disguised as lore. Most haunting of all is how the prediction played out historically. Medieval chronicles like the Annals of Ulster describe 538 as the year of breadlessness, when desperate crowds resorted to eating nettles and tree bark, precisely the crisis the Druids had warned would follow their arboreal signs. Even the carving's location feels deliberate, cut into a ritual pole at the boundary between farmland and forest, as if marking a threshold between abundance and scarcity. What modern climatologists find revelatory is the Druids' understanding of lag effects. Their warning didn't claim famine would strike during the abnormal tree growth, but after, accounting for how food systems collapse gradually. This nuance separates their prophecy from generic doomsaying. It's a timeline, not just an omen. Today, as we drill ice cores and satellite map deforestation, we're relearning what the Druids knew. Nature's archives hold prophecies far older than scripture. The real question isn't whether they predicted the famine. It's how many other climate warnings we've yet to decode from the silent rings of ancient trees. In the 2nd century B.C.E., as the Jewish people suffered under the oppressive rule of the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes, a mysterious text began circulating among resistance fighters, a vision so precise it would shape Western eschatology for millennia. The book of Daniel's 4th chapter unveils a nightmare, a colossal statue with a head of gold, chest of silver, belly of bronze, and legs of iron mixed with clay, shattered by a divine stone. At first glance, this seems like surreal fantasy, but when you lay it beside the archaeological record, the alignment is staggering, a near-perfect prophecy of 4 world empires rising and falling in succession. The golden head, Daniel explains, represents Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, an identification supported by the city's infamous excess. Excavations at Babylon's Ishtar Gate reveal glazed bricks coated in genuine gold leaf, while texts describe the king's boast, "Is not this great Babylon which I have built by my mighty power?" Yet within decades, just as Daniel foretold, the silver chest emerged the Medo-Persian Empire under Cyrus, whose conquest was famously bloodless. The biblical text notes this regime would be inferior to Babylon, matching Persia's reliance on local governance rather than absolute monarchy. Then came the bronze-belly Alexander the Great's Hellenistic Empire, whose armor-clad phalanxes dominated the ancient world. Coins minted under Alexander's successors show warriors in bronze cuirasses, while the Book of Maccabees describes Seleucid troops glittering with bronze as they oppressed Judea. But it's the Fourth Kingdom, the Iron Legs, that chills historians. Rome's military machine, harder than any preceding power, fits the metallurgical metaphor perfectly. Iron was Rome's defining technology. From gladius swords to siege engines, their strength lay in unyielding force. The prophecy's most haunting detail concerns the feet of iron mixed with clay, a fragile composite Daniel interprets as a divided kingdom. This aligns eerily with Rome's later fracture into Eastern and Western empires, their cohesion undermined by internal strife and barbarian alliances. Some scholars even see foreshadowing of Europe's medieval patchwork, where Roman legal traditions, iron, blended uneasily with tribal customs, clay. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve early Jewish commentaries debating this very passage, with one sectarian text linking it to contemporary Roman tax collectors' proof that ancient readers recognized the prophecy's unfolding relevance. What elevates this beyond mere historical parallelism is the vision's conclusion. The stone, cut not by human hands, that demolishes the statue. Judaism traditionally interprets this as Messiah's arrival, while Christians see Christ's incarnation during Rome's reign. But the deeper insight lies in the metaphor itself. Unlike the statue's manufactured metals, the stone is natural, a symbol of divine sovereignty breaking humanity's cyclical oppression. Archaeologists have noted how Roman concrete, while revolutionary, relied on brittle volcanic ash, while Jerusalem's Temple Mount was built from enduring limestone. The prophecy wasn't just predicting empires, it was contrasting earthly power's temporary shine with something eternal. Modern historians debate whether Daniel was written during Babylonian exile, 6th century B.C.E., or the Maccabean Revolt, 2nd century B.C.E. But the text's uncanny accuracy, whether prescient or retrospective, reveals a profound truth about how civilizations view themselves. Every empire believes its glory will never tarnish, its metal never corrode. Yet time and again the statue falls, and perhaps that's the real prophecy here. Not just the names of kingdoms, but the certainty that no earthly power, no matter how brilliant, escapes the dust. More than 3,000 years before Henry Ford's assembly lines began spitting out Model Ts, the ancient Chinese divination text known as the I Ching contained a hexagram that seems to gallop straight out of the future. Hexagram 34, Da Zhuang, the power of the great, describes a force so monumental it breaks through heaven's gate, propelled by creatures of unbending metal that run without rest. Traditional commentaries interpreted this as a metaphor for unstoppable willpower. But fast forward to the early 20th century, and you'll find photographs of the very first automobiles rumbling down dirt roads, their steel frames glinting in the sun like the I Ching's metal horses, their engines panting with the same relentless energy as the hexagram's description of thunder rising from the earth. The parallels become uncanny when you dissect Da Zhuang's individual lines. The text speaks of 6 at the beginning, depicting a horse bound by chains, eerily mirroring the earliest prototypes of cars' clunky, experimental machines like Carl Benz's 1886 Motorwagen, still tethered to their horseless carriage origins. Then comes 9 in the second place, warning that the axle breaks if pushed too hard, a prediction anyone who's suffered a blowout on a vintage tire can attest to. Even the hexagram's judgment line about perseverance bringing reward aligns with Ford's relentless tinkering. It took him multiple failed companies before the Model T revolutionized transportation in 1908. Black and white newsreels from the era bring this prophecy to life in surreal detail. Watch those grainy films of early traffic jams in New York or London, where horse-drawn carriages and sputtering automobiles jockey for space, exactly the chaotic transition the I Ching's thunder beneath heaven imagery suggests. There's a particular shot from 1905 of a Ford Model struggling up a steep hill, its wheels spinning in the mud as the driver leans out to crank the engine. It's a perfect enactment of Da Zhuang's cautionary line. The great must not rely on strength alone, lest it exhausts itself halfway. What elevates this beyond coincidence is how the I Ching structure mirrors automotive evolution. The text's 64 hexagrams represent all possible cosmic permutations, and just as cars evolved from luxury toys to mass-produced necessities, Da Zhuang sits adjacent to hexagrams like by holding together, hinting at assembly lines, and Zhu waiting, reflecting the patience required for technological maturation. Even the concept of changing lines, where one hexagram morphs into another, parallels how cars transformed from novelties into societal keystones. But here's where the prophecy turns profound. The I Ching doesn't just describe machines, it anticipates their cultural impact. Dazhuang's final line warns that unchecked power leads to arrogance and downfall, foreshadowing everything from reckless early speeding laws to modern climate crises fueled by fossil fuels. The text's ancient compilers couldn't have envisioned tailpipes or traffic lights, yet their symbolic language captured the essence of mechanized velocity with startling clarity. Whether by cosmic insight or poetic intuition, the metal horses of the I Ching didn't just predict the automobile's rise. They hinted at the moral crossroads it would drag us toward, hoofbeats echoing across millennia. The Nile ran red not with metaphor but with something far more terrifying. That's the scene painted by the Ipuwer papyrus, an ancient Egyptian text so visceral it reads like an eyewitness account of hell on earth. Plague stalks the land, blood is everywhere, the river is blood, yet men drink from it. The scribe laments, describing a world where the social order has collapsed, where the rich starve alongside the poor, and the gods seem to have abandoned Egypt entirely. For over a century, scholars dismissed these words as poetic exaggeration until geologists uncovered evidence of a catastrophe that turned the Nile's waters the color of rust, linking the papyrus to one of the most tumultuous periods in human history, the Bronze Age collapse. What connects these events isn't just tragedy, it's chemistry. Sediment cores drilled from the Nile Delta contain a microscopic smoking gun, volcanic glass shards dating to around 1600 BCE. These tiny fragments, ejected from the Thera eruption modern-day Santorini, drifted hundreds of miles before settling into the river's lifeblood. When mixed with algae blooms triggered by ash-induced cooling, the water could have taken on a reddish hue exactly as the Ipuwer papyrus describes. But the chaos didn't stop at the riverbank. The same volcanic winter that turned the Nile bloody would have devastated crops, explaining the papyrus's harrowing lines about famine years and women barren from hunger. The devastation rippled across empires. Hittite tablets from the same era beg foreign traders for grain, their words mirroring the Ipuwer's desperation. Our fields are dust, our stores empty. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Era describes the sun itself darkening, while Chinese bamboo annals record yellow fog and summer frosts, all symptoms of a stratospheric ash veil. The Ipuwer papyrus, once seen as local folklore, suddenly emerges as a keystone in a global catastrophe. But here's where it gets chilling. The scribe doesn't just record disasters, he predicts their cyclical return. This land spins like a potter's wheel, he warns, suggesting these horrors weren't random, but part of an inevitable chaos cycle where civilization teeters, falls, and rebuilds. Modern climate models confirm his intuition. Ice cores show volcanic pulses every few centuries, each coinciding with societal collapses from the Akkadian Empire to the Maya. The Egyptians, it seems, didn't just endure catastrophe, they mapped its rhythm. The ultimate proof lies in temple reliefs. At Medinet Habu, Ramses III's artists carved scenes of invading sea peoples, long blamed for the Bronze Age collapse, but look closer. These warriors aren't just conquering, they're fleeing. Their ships carry women and children, their postures desperate rather than aggressive. New evidence suggests they were climate refugees, displaced by the same volcanic winters that starved Egypt. The Ipuwer prophecy wasn't merely accurate, it was recursive, a warning that when the earth coughs fire, humanity's empires always tremble. And in an age of rising sea otwo and erratic weather, that cycle feels less like ancient history and more like a ticking clock. Long before Noah built his ark or Gilgamesh sought immortality, Australia's Aboriginal cultures were preserving memories of a catastrophe so vast it reshaped continents, the Great Flood. Passed down through songlines for over 65,000 years, these stories don't just speak of rising waters, they map them with pinpoint accuracy. In the Dreamtime legend of the Yolngu people, the ancestor Baralku watched as the sea rushed in like a thief, swallowing sacred sites that now lie 50 feet beneath the Arafura Sea. The Gunditjmara tell of Bunjil's eagle creating islands by scattering soil as waves chased their ancestors inland. For generations, these accounts were dismissed as symbolic myths, until geologists drilled into the seabed and found drowned fireplaces, stone tools, and shell middens exactly where the stories said they'd be. Animated reconstructions of post-Ice Age sea level rises reveal why these oral histories are so chillingly precise. Between 18 and 8,000 years ago, melting glaciers raised global oceans by over 400 feet, inundating nearly a third of Australia's coastline. The timeline matches. Yolngu elders describe the flood occurring over many lifetimes, correlating with the slow but relentless inundation captured in sediment cores. One particularly haunting story from the Kimberley region details a wall of water that forced tribes to retreat to the Wandjina rock art sites, now perched high above today's shorelines. Researchers using LiDAR technology have identified submerged river valleys matching the described escape routes, their contours preserved like ghostly fingerprints beneath the waves. What sets Aboriginal flood narratives apart is their topographic specificity. Unlike the Bible's global deluge or Mesopotamia's sudden storm, these stories often name drowned landmarks with surveyor-like detail. The Ungarangeri people of South Australia speak of Kangaroo Island once being connected to the mainland, a fact confirmed by bathymetric maps showing an ancient land bridge now 200 feet underwater. Similarly, the Tasmanian Palawa describe hunting grounds lost beneath Bass Strait to rain later mapped by sonar, revealing riverbeds and valleys that once teemed with megafauna. These aren't vague allegories, they're ancestral GPS coordinates encoded in rhythm and rhyme to survive millennia. The global pattern is undeniable. From the Klamath tribe's tales of Crater Lake's volcanic collapse to the Welsh legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod's sunken kingdom, flood myths overwhelmingly cluster in regions where Ice Age meltwaters transformed coastlines. But Australia's stories stand alone in their chronological depth and environmental precision. While the Epic of Gilgamesh might compress centuries into 7 days of rain, Aboriginal accounts often preserve tidal rhythms, like the Luritja people's description of saltwater, creeping higher with each full moon, mirroring the punctuated surges seen in Antarctic ice melt data. Modern oceanographers have turned to these narratives as legitimate historical records. When marine archaeologists searched for prehistoric settlements off the Pilbara coast, they used Yindjibarndi songlines to locate a submerged freshwater spring still bubbling 20 meters below sea level. Elsewhere, linguists found that common words for boat in coastal tribes only entered languages after the floods, suggesting a cultural shift forced by rising waters. Even the Dreamtime's metaphorical rainbow serpent, often depicted as a creator deity, takes on new meaning when viewed through a hydrogeological lens, its winding path echoing the flash floods that carved Australia's inland river systems as the continent dried post-deluge. The bittersweet brilliance of these stories lies in their resilience. Aboriginal cultures didn't just survive this cataclysm, they wove its lessons into every facet of life. Fire management practices evolved to protect refugee populations huddled on shrinking highlands. Kinship systems expanded to integrate displaced clans. Unlike civilizations that saw floods as divine punishment, Australia's First Nations framed them as cyclical inevitabilities, a perspective modern climate scientists now echo as Greenland's ice sheets hemorrhage billions of tons yearly. Perhaps that's the real prophecy hidden in these ancient narratives, not just a memory of lost lands, but a blueprint for adaptation when the waters rise again. The air itself seemed to shiver when the Völva spoke. This Norse seeress, her staff clenched in gnarled hands, didn't just predict the future, she carved it into the fabric of reality with words sharper than any Viking blade. Her prophecy, preserved in the Völuspá of the Poetic Edda, begins not with fire or fury, but with silence. Brothers will fight and kill each other, sisters' sons will defile kinship. At first glance, this might sound like generic doom-mongering, but Viking scholars recognize it as a chillingly precise forecast of the societal unraveling that preceded Scandinavia's most violent epochs. The Völva's vision escalates with ecological horrors ripped straight from climate records. Hard times will hammer the world, an axe age, a sword age, shields will be cloven, she intones, a portrait of warfare that mirrors archaeological finds from the 9th century, when mass graves across Denmark revealed skeletons with shield-split skulls. But it's her next lines that freeze the blood. The sun turns black, earth sinks in the sea, bright stars vanish from the sky. Ice cores from Greenland confirm this wasn't poetic license. Layers of volcanic ash dating to the mid-6th century CE, right when oral traditions suggest the Völuspá was first composed, preserve evidence of a dust veil event that plunged Europe into years of twilight. What separates the Völva from other prophets is her clinical specificity. She doesn't just say the world will end, she catalogues the dominoes that must fall first. The wolf skull swallowing the sun, that's no metaphor. Solar eclipses visible from Scandinavia occurred in 591 and 664 CE, both coinciding with famines recorded in runestones. The serpent writhing in Jörmungandr's fury could reference the massive earthquakes that rocked Norway's coast in the 8th century, sending tidal waves inland. Even her infamous cock's-crow signaling Ragnarök finds eerie parallel in the Viking habit of using roosters as tsunami alarms. Their distress calls carried farther than human shouts. But the true genius of her prophecy lies in its cyclical nature. Unlike linear apocalypses, Ragnarök concludes with rebirth. The earth rises again, green and fair. This wasn't just mysticism, it reflected the Norse world, shaped by real environmental cycles. Pollen samples from Swedish lakes show how forests regrew rapidly after volcanic winters, birthing new ecosystems from devastation. The Völva wasn't just predicting doom, she was mapping humanity's eternal dance with catastrophe and renewal. Perhaps most haunting are the smaller, often overlooked details, the golden chess pieces scattered in the grass after the gods' fall. In 1891, a farmer in Hopi, Denmark, unearthed a silver Valkyrie figurine amidst charred longhouse ruins. Her hollow eyes stared skyward, her outstretched hands still clutching tiny gaming pieces, a tableau frozen mid-Ragnarök. Finds like this suggest the Völva's words weren't mere poetry, but a mosaic of observed trauma and hard-won resilience. She didn't just see the end coming. She understood how civilizations stitch themselves back together when the threads of fate finally snap. High in the snowbound reaches of the Himalayas, where the air thins to a crystalline sharpness, a legend pulses through the prayers of Tibetan monks. The prophecy of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom veiled between dimensions, waiting to reveal itself when the world teeters on the edge of chaos. Unlike mythical utopias of Western lore, Shambhala isn't just a refuge. It's a spiritual battleground, a celestial stronghold where an army of enlightened warriors will one day emerge to vanquish darkness. Ancient Tibetan texts like the Kalachakra Tantra describe this realm with startling specificity. A circular kingdom of 8 snow-capped regions, ruled by monarchs who carried titles like Rigden, meaning holder of wisdom. The prophecies even pin its revelation to a precise trigger. When barbarians who worship the machine push humanity to the brink, the gates of Shambhala will open, unleashing a tidal wave of Dharma to restore balance. Modern explorers have risked everything chasing this vision. In the early 20th century, Russian mystic Nicholas Roerich led expeditions across the Himalayas, convinced Shambhala's entrance lay in the Altai Mountains. His journals describe encountering nomadic tribes who spoke of a valley of blue flames, where compasses spun wildly, a phenomenon later confirmed by geologists as magnetic anomalies in the region's iron-rich rock. Even Heinrich Himmler's Nazi occultists became obsessed, sending SS teams to Tibet in search of Shambhala's vril energy, a pursuit that ended in frozen corpses and delusional ramblings about shadow cities glimpsed in blizzards. But the prophecy's real power lies in its psychological precision. The Kalachakra doesn't just predict Shambhala's arrival, it maps the moral decay that will precede it. Texts speak of an age when rulers will be thieves in ministers' robes, when rivers choke with poison and wars are waged over invisible currencies. Sound familiar to Tibetan scholars? These aren't vague omens. They're diagnostic criteria for modern crises, from political corruption to cryptocurrency speculation. The Dalai Lama himself has drawn parallels between Shambhala's prophecies and climate collapse, noting how Himalayan glaciers, the literal frozen tears of compassionate deities in Buddhist lore, are now melting at apocalyptic speed. Perhaps the most haunting evidence lies in the landscape itself. Satellite imagery of the Tibetan plateau reveals strange, symmetrical formations near Mount Kailash, geometric ridges that resemble the Kalachakra's descriptions of Shambhala's concentric rings. Local herders avoid these areas, claiming the ground sings during full moons, a phenomenon acoustics experts attribute to wind funneling through narrow valleys. Yet for believers, these anomalies aren't geological quirks. They're the kingdom's heartbeat, growing louder as the prophecy's hour approaches. What makes Shambhala unique among ancient predictions is its active invitation. Unlike passive doomsday scenarios, the Kalachakra teaches that humanity can accelerate the kingdom's emergence through collective enlightenment. Monasteries across the Himalayas host intricate sand mandalas depicting Shambhala's layout, not as a map to be followed, but as a neural blueprint to be internalized. The message is clear: the kingdom isn't just a place, it's a state of consciousness waiting to be unlocked when the world finally stops searching with its eyes and learns to see with its soul. The irony, of course, is that Shambhala's seekers often mistake the metaphor for the destination. Whether it's New Age pilgrims meditating in Ladakh's caves or tech billionaires funding secret Antarctic expeditions, the prophecy endures because it speaks to humanity's deepest yearning, not for escape but for transformation. As the Himalayas continue their slow, tectonic dance, one truth becomes inescapable. If Shambhala is real, its gates won't be found on any map. They'll swing open in the space between despair and hope, in the moment we stop running from the world's darkness and start lighting candles in the dark. From the Oracle of Delphi steering Athens to victory with riddles about wooden walls, to the Cherokee foreseeing iron snakes slithering across continents, what we've uncovered today isn't just a collection of lucky guesses. These were visions that sliced through time with surgical precision, predicting inventions, wars, and cosmic events centuries before science could explain them. Think about Nostradamus encoding the Great Fire of London in numerical puzzles, or the Maya calculating celestial cycles so accurately their calendar still baffles astronomers. Even the Sioux prophecies of black snakes pipelines we now know leak poison into sacred lands speak to a kind of foresight that feels less like coincidence and more like a warning etched into the bones of history. So were these ancient seers tapping into some lost method of divination, or simply masters of reading the patterns hidden in plain sight? The Brahan seer didn't just predict steamships, he described the clearance's trauma down to the scent of burning thatch. The Ipuwer papyrus didn't vaguely mention famine. It documented ecological collapse with the rigor of a modern climate report. Whether through astrological math, ecological intuition, or something beyond our understanding, these predictions share a common thread. They didn't just describe the future, they interacted with it. The Sibylline books shaped Rome's military strategy, while the Marduk prophecy became a weapon wielded by conquerors. But here's what chills me most. For every prophecy we've decoded, there are dozens still waiting in the shadows. What if the Mayan long count's true meaning wasn't about doomsday, but a cycle we're still navigating? Could the Shambhala prophecy be less about a hidden kingdom and more about the collective awakening we're seeing today? That's the real mystery, not whether these predictions were right, but why they resonate so deeply even now. Which one left you speechless, the Aztec emperor frozen by his own prophecy as Cortés marched ashore, the Viking Völva who foretold volcanic winters down to the taste of ash? Drop your pick in the comments, and if this journey through time has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe, because in part 2, we're diving into predictions that haven't happened yet. From the third secret of Fatima to the Hopi's final warning, the past might just hold the key to what's coming.